This video is rated T or Tickle Me Pink. Have you guys ever noticed that weapons with identical stats can feel significantly different? A great example of this is the AUG 1 versus the AUG 3. Outfitted with the exact same attachments, these weapons will feel different. Why is that? Well, that is because the hidden stats in Escape from Tarkov. You can always see the stats on a weapon, but you can never see the hidden stats. Today, we're going to be talking a lot of these hidden properties. For example, Dispersion or Convergence. If you've never heard of those, they radically influence the way a weapon feels while you're shooting it in Escape from Tarkov. And we're also going to be talking about things like how to properly utilize Foregrips so you get free weapon shielding on your character. Yeah, imagine that. You're going to live through significantly more thorax shots after watching this video just based on the way your character holds his weapon. You probably have never considered this when picking a tactical foregrip for your weapon, but it makes a massive difference. We'll also be talking about things like the parallax on various optics and what is the correct optic to use in what situation, or things like what flashlight to use in certain situation, what flashlight has the widest cone of blind, for example. So lots of hidden properties that are just not shown in the stats page in Escape from Tarkov, and I'm going to teach you guys all of this today. If you guys are new to the channel, my name is Cal. I go by Tickle Me Pink on Twitch and on YouTube, and I'm a full-time cringe ass. I have 9,000 hours in Escape from Tarkov, and I've been playing since 2017. And I was also a professional FPS player in games like CSGO, Overwatch, and Dirty Bomb. So I'm not just some shithead reading off the wiki trying to get views from you guys. I'm actually going to teach you something in this video. So sit back, relax, crack yourself open a cold one, and let's learn about all the hidden properties of weapons in Escape from Tarkov. So the first hidden stat that is on every single weapon that you won't be able to see in the actual game is Dispersion. Now I'll actually go ahead and have some of these hidden stats on the side of the screen right now so you can follow along. But if you want to pull these up yourself, maybe see weapons, do your own digging, just navigate over to my Twitch and type !hidden stats, just like you see on the screen right now, and that'll pop right up for you. Back to Dispersion. So Dispersion you can imagine like this. The bigger the numerical value associated with the weapon is, the wider the line will be. Now, how is that line going to sit? It's going to sit parallel with the ground. So imagine a line going through your weapon parallel to the ground. And the larger the dispersion number is, the longer this line is. Now, imagine on that line from end to end, you can potentially, when shooting your weapon, kick your weapon all the way over to that left or all the way over to that right. So imagine, if you will, every time you're shooting around in Escape from Tarkov, it's just deciding somewhere along that plane that your weapon is going to kick to the left or the weapon is going to kick to the right. If you've spent any amount of time online on FPS games, you know that horizontal recoil is the absolute bane of aim. And the reason for that is you can't account for it. Every single shot, for example, some weapons shoot 1100 rounds per minute. You're getting kicked left and you're getting kicked right, and it balances itself out. So you really don't need to move left or right. The only time you can account for horizontal recoil is you're playing a game, for example, that has pre-made weapon spray patterns, and then you're not really accounting for the horizontal so much so, but just getting used to a certain pull down spray where you move kind of serpentine-esque, moving left to right. You know, people say, oh, it's a backward 7, for example, for recoil pattern. But when it really comes down to games that don't have these pre-made recoil patterns, you're screwed. The wider that line is, now that we have it pictured on screen, that is effectively the bloom of your weapon, you know, the furthest edge of your bloom of your weapon, and it just comes down to a law of averages. Now, although Convergence is a hidden stat and all these weapons start with this a base line here, for example, then we can go ahead and modify this with in-game weapon recoil. So a common misconception people have in the Escape from Tarkov community is they always look at the vertical recoil stat. Now, vertical recoil is simply just pulling the weapon down, especially now that recoil has been nerfed significantly and the weapons are quite manageable, if you will. The vertical recoil really isn't important whatsoever. What we're really looking to lower is horizontal recoil on a lot of these weapons. And with all of these recoil reducing attachments, we're actually going to be going ahead and shrinking up that line, you know, making our grouping significantly tighter. That's going to increase our accuracy at range. Now, we do need to talk about muzzle velocity and actual M.O.A. and accuracy after this, but you know, in your 0 to 50 range, this is going to make a big difference, and it primarily will make the largest difference with fully automatic rifles. Now that you have a good understanding of dispersion, you see this line here, how to shrink it. let's talk about recoil angle. Now, recoil angle is not super relevant on a lot of weapons because almost every single automatic rifle comes with a standard 90-degree recoil angle. So if you're, looking at the ceiling, that'll be your 90 degrees right there. So parallel with the floor up to the ceiling, right? Only a few weapons actually are not on a 90-degree recoil angle. So weapons like the AK-101 or the AK-102, they actually are on a 100-degree angle. And that's why they feel a little bit different when shooting fully automatic versus almost all the other standardized weapons. They're on that 90-degree angle. So just keep that in mind. We're not going to touch too much base on it because it's pretty niche. Now, the next stat you need to know about that's important, particularly for DMRs, is convergence. Now, convergence is actually going to go ahead and be how fast your weapon returns to center after you've pulled that trigger and the game is, ran its RNG and decided how much dispersion you're going to have on your weapon, as well as your horizontal recoil from your modifications on your weapon. So let's say you get pulled all the way to the far right. If you have high convergence, you're going to get recentered up really fast. And this is why certain weapons feel really snappy. So for example, if you've used a TX15 and you're tapping, you get snapped right back on really fast, but you go ahead and use the 8R and it feels a little bit more sluggish. Well, the reason for that is actually the convergence of the weapon. And if you were to pair something like a TX15 or an SAG with a really high ergonomics, then because they already have a really low base dispersion and a high convergence, well, then you're going to be able to ADS significantly faster and have that really snappy feeling DMR, if you will. And that's why these hidden stats are so important. So the last hidden stat we need to talk about is camera shake. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and have my rifle out and have a laser on. And then I'm just not going to move whatsoever, and I'm going to add an earthquake effect onto the video itself, and you'll see the whole screen is moving and what looks like the middle of the screen is actually moving. However, the laser is staying in the exact same place. So this is what camera shake is, and it makes it harder for tracking enemies. For example, it's not truly making your bloom larger, but it's kind of throwing your shot off, right? Especially with the changes to recoil and making weapons much more wieldy to use, they want to make sure that engagements just aren't ending instantly unless it's a well-placed shot. That's why plates are so hard to pen. And yes, plates are doing an immaculate job of protecting people. You guys have survivorship bias. People keep saying armor is not working. You guys just have not learned what survivorship bias is yet. And I'll do an entire video on that. And then once you guys have watched that video, well, you're not going to feel like armor is RNG anymore, and you're probably going to be destroying everybody. But back to the point of this video, hidden stats and modifying your weapon correctly. That is why something, for example, like an HK versus an M4, the HK feels like it's just kicking so much more. It's this camera recoil stat. It might have slightly higher dispersion, and you can just pump it full of recoil reducing attachments, but you're still getting like a more extreme earthquake effect. And although this is not a hidden stat, it's a stat that people really gloss over, and that is fire rate, right? So we understand that every time you pull the trigger, that dispersion is getting kicked in. You might get pulled all the way to the right or all the way to the left, if you will. Then convergence needs to move us back in the center of the screen. With a high rate of fire weapon, you're going to get another shot off before you get pulled back in the center of the screen, which is effectively going to potentially move the gun even further to the right, if you will, if you're tracking what I'm saying here, right? And these high rate of fire weapons can really amplify all of these stats because you're getting all of these stats every single shot. So keep that in mind. Even with a difference of only 50 rounds per minute, it may not seem like a whole lot, but it can make the weapon feel significantly harder to control. So the mutant versus the RD, the mutant will always feel a lot more unwieldy. Same thing with the HK versus the M4. So you need to keep that in mind. Accuracy through volume is a real thing, and it gets people tons of kills in Escape from Tarkov. However, if your bloom and your shot is getting thrown radically off, then accuracy through volume is not going to help you. You're just praying that you get a lucky shot on somebody. But earlier I was talking about why certain weapons feel better because of the hidden stats. So let's talk about a few case uses now you have a good understanding of these hidden stats. So let's talk the AUG. The AUG is an amazing budget rifle to use this wipe, but the AUG A3 actually just across the board has significantly better stats than the AUG A1. So if you have access to buy that A3, you should always be utilizing that A3 model to just go ahead and make your groupings tighter, deal with less recoil, have better convergence, etc. You're just going to get yourself more kills. And for example, let's talk about the AS Val versus the VSS. So did you know the VSS actually has better hidden stats than the AS Val, which makes it a better rifle to use? The one with the wooden stock you can't actually modify the stock on ends up being better than the VSS. Now there's actually a caveat to that because there's different weapon classings here. So the VSS is classified as a DMR. So when you use it, you'll be leveling your DMR skill and utilizing your DMR recoil control modifier from your skills. So as you level your assault rifle skill, let's say you pass 15-20 assault rifle skill, well now guess what? The AS Val is considered an assault rifle. And now that you have your skill high enough, that recoil reducer is effectively going to be lowering your dispersion and making that AS Val stronger than the VSS after you have those stats leveled. So now you're really understanding why these weapons feel so much different. Now we covered hidden stats. However, many of you probably feel like you don't need to watch the rest of this video. And if that's you, that's fine. But I'm actually going to teach you guys about certain attachments that have hidden properties that will net you advantages. Things like blinding your opponent significantly more. Things like surviving through more shots. Yes, you can survive through more shots by just changing the attachments of your weapon. That probably doesn't make any sense to you right now. Things like spotting your enemies with things like eye relief. We're going to talk about all of these. I just want to briefly speak on the actual visible stats on weapons because although these aren't hidden, many people don't know the properties of these stats and they build their weapons incorrectly due to that. So let's briefly touch base on that. And if you've learned anything so far, make sure to smash the dislike button and tell me to kill myself in the comments down below. And if you're looking for people to play with, my Discord is a thriving place to play with really cool guys. One of my favorite parts of the day is just getting in there, getting to know you guys, and getting to run some raids with you. So I look forward to seeing you guys there. So let's touch base first and foremost on ergonomics and weight, and they practically go hand in hand. So you want to get your ergonomics high and keep your weight low. With high ergonomics and low weight, you're going to be able to ADS significantly faster. So let's imagine you're running out in the open and you spot a target. You need to get shots on target as fast as possible. How fast you're able to bring that rifle from your shoulder to your eye is going to be entirely based on this ergonomic and weight stat. And you might see high-end players like Landmark, who likes to run heavy recoil reducing builds. You might see him start to shoot before he actually ever enters ADS. And you can do this, but it's significantly better to run those high ergonomic builds in low weight situations if you're going to be in like a high mobility situation where you need to quickly acquire targets. And it doesn't stop there, not just in instances where you actually need to raise your weapon from the shoulder to the eye, but in instances where you're actually point firing your weapon. If you ever notice when you're running like a really big SA-58, for example, or a really heavy weapon with low ergonomics, how laggy it is when you actually sway. So imagine you do a perfect 90-degree twist to the left with a high ergonomic rifle, it's going to immediately move with you, and wherever the center of your screen is where your barrel is going to be pointing. However, with high weight weapons and low ergonomics, it's going to lag behind. So let's imagine you are running through dorms, for example. You spot someone out of the corner of your eye, and right as you run by him hiding in the corner, you need to snap and take off his head. Well, you built your weapon entirely for recoil control, and it's super heavy like most players in Tarkov do. Your weapon lagged behind and he already had his weapon shouldered and aimed at your face. You are now dead. High ergonomic weapons and low weight weapons can help with this situation. Having high ergonomics and low weight can also make it really nice if you're running something like a DMR or a sniper rifle and you want to stay scoped in for a long period of time, as they will influence how much arm stamina you're using. Additionally, ergonomics and weight are important for how loud you are when you ADS. Have you been in a situation where you thought you were the only person there and then you hear someone ADS on you, right? That is influence from ergonomics and weight. So what are some instances where we really want to prioritize ergonomics and weight? And it's every single situation. You want to find a good balance for each weapon that matches their hidden stats, right? If a weapon has super high dispersion, it needs some recoil control help. You want to lean towards attachments that have better recoil control. But if you're using a weapon where you really need to be high mobility, move and assess targets fast, you probably want to lean more into ergonomics. For example, I've been running a full ergo HK build when I'm playing extremely balls to the walls on labs, on factory, and that's because I'm getting these really short range engagements. So if I sprint by someone in black and I turn on and immediately pull the trigger, my barrel is already pointed in their face, right? If I spot someone running up high, I need to quickly ADS. I only have a split second to make that shot. I've already put my weapon up to my eye. But that doesn't go to say that I run this HK build all around. When I go somewhere like streets, I'm getting more mid-range engagements a lot of the time. And so I'll run a build that's more focused on recoil control and rely more on that accuracy through volume when I'm getting those engagements literally in the streets. So think about who your enemy is, which probably sounds ridiculous. Think about the instances you're going to be fighting, maybe what your goal is for the raid. If you already know, let's say you want to go loot a certain item or you have a certain quest, then you're going to know, hey, I need to lean more into ergonomics or more into recoil control on this build. And if you take this same approach to your entire kit, like, you know, what armor you're going to wear, what helmet you're going to wear, in what instances, this could apply to all sorts of things like camouflage, and it's really going to influence your survival rate. After watching this video, I wouldn't be surprised if your survival rate goes up by a few percentage points. Just take this perspective. What is your goal for said raid on said map, and then build a kit that's most favorable for that situation. It sounds super silly to say out loud, but you'll see people bringing SMGs to woods, right? Shotguns to woods with buckshot in them. They didn't think about this and they died for it. Or you'll also see many Tarkov players just simply running rifles everywhere. Now, rifles are great in Tarkov, don't get me wrong, but build a weapon and build a kit for your situation. The last thing we really need to touch base on is M.O.A. and muzzle velocity, and they kind of go hand in hand to an extent. We'll also talk about weapon zeroing in this section. So just make sure you're looking at muzzle velocity. For example, people love the Ash 12 because it shoots PS12B. It's a Russian 50 cal. The casings, when they hit the ground, they sound sex, right? And it hits like a truck. It's also fully automatic, but people like to try and utilize this weapon as a DMR, and they completely glance over the muzzle velocity of the weapon or the M.O.A. So in the instance of the Ash 12, people glance over the muzzle velocity. The round is moving extremely slow. You need to aim significantly further ahead. No one really looks at these properties. For example, 5.56 can have massively different muzzle velocities. Although it's the same caliber, an AK-101 can have over 1,000 muzzle velocity, where other 5.56 can have only 700 meters a second muzzle velocity. So keep that in mind. It'll really influence how a weapon feels, how far you need to aim ahead, or why bullets just feel like they're not connecting. It's usually because of muzzle velocity or M.O.A. And M.O.A. is minutes of angle, and it's basically your bloom at range. So imagine if we were looking at our character from the side here and then down the range to the right. Imagine a cone, if you will, and the cone is super sharp and it starts right at the end of our barrel, and as it goes down range, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's a linear cone. But what M.O.A. is how you can read it is at 100 yards, if you have one M.O.A, you're going to go ahead and have a diameter of 2 inches, right? So a diameter of 2 inches at 100 yards, and it's a linear scale. So at 200 yards, just to keep it simple, then it'll be a 4-inch diameter with that same one M.O.A, right? So now let's think about back to the Ash 12 using PS12Bs. If you guys are familiar with the RSH-12, it's an awesome weapon. People like to think that they're going to go ahead and strap a Razor Vortex to the RSH-12 and go snipe people with it, right? They don't really look at the M.O.A. of the weapon. That weapon has an M.O.A. of, I believe, 8, right? Think about that. It's 100 yards. That is a 16-inch diameter, right? So if you're not exactly on the center of that chest, your bullets are going around the target. So now you can look at this accuracy stat and really get like a good visual understanding of what your M.O.A, what your bloom at range is really going to be. Now I want to touch base on attachments that give you guys hidden properties. The first attachment that has a whole host of hidden properties is the foregrip. Now I've never really heard anyone talk about this except for Willer Z, and that video did quite well, but I still think it didn't have really the effect it should have had on the Tarkov player base. So what is important with foregrips? So foregrips will influence actually how your weapon twists the gun as you're moving around, and it'll actually cant it to the sides. Now if you start shooting with this twist, it's actually going to pull that recoil up on a diagonal angle. Additionally, right now with the changes that came to the most recent patch, they made it so your upper arms are not pennable by bullets. So when you're shooting someone from the elbow to the shoulder, that's not penetratable. And the reason for this was people were tired of getting armpitted through their upper arm, right? Now, if you use something like a canted sight with the correct foregrip, or you're just using the right foregrip in general, you're actually going to go ahead and swing in that upper arm over a good chunk of your upper thorax. And keep in mind, that is not penetratable. It doesn't matter what round you're shooting at it. You can go ahead and shoot the biggest rounds in the game, PS-12B, 338 AP. It will not go through that arm, and you can effectively use that to make yourself tankier. So what are we looking for in grips? We're really looking for a grip that sways the gun well. So for example, the current SE5 grip sways the weapon really well. Angled foregrips in general do really well with weapon sway. And then additionally, we want to get a good balance of both ergonomics and recoil control. So for another example is SE5. Now, you might see streamers still using the canted B25 a lot. Why is that? Well, there's actually a hidden property with the canted B25, and that is your middle knuckle actually indicates where you're going to be shooting. So if you were to put a dot in the center of your screen and then move around and shoot in Tarkov, or just turn on a laser, if you will, and compare it against that dot, you'll notice that your gun is not shooting at the center of your screen all the time. While you're strafing, your weapon actually pans to left to right to left to right. And what this B25 is effectively doing is showing you a visual understanding of the x-axis where the middle of your screen is, right? So even though the canted B25 has been nerfed a lot, that's a big reason why people actually still utilize that, to just get another sort of feel of where the middle of the screen is. And then they're not looking down at their knuckle on like the middle of their screen, right? But it's always in their peripheral vision, and it just helps them line up their shots and helps them point fire significantly nicer. Speaking of point firing, I'm sure you guys know that if you have a tactical device, a laser on your weapon, and it's turned on, it'll actually make your point fire significantly more accurate. Your groupings are going to be much tighter. What a lot of people don't know actually is flashlights have this same effect. Every flashlight in the game right now, except for the two 25mm flashlight rings, as well as the 2U, will actually go ahead and give you a bonus to your hip fire with the flashlight on. Now keep in mind, those three currently do not have the bonus. I'm sure they'll get them in the future. So maybe if you're watching this at a much later date, these work now too. But what flashlight should you be using? Well, GigaBeef did like a whole 20-minute video showing you every single flashlight, but let me just make this simple for you guys, right? The main thing you want for a flashlight is to have a wide cone and to blind enemies. You're not really using it to see in the dark, to look for loot, right? You're using it to blind enemies. That is its purpose in Escape from Tarkov. So starting from worst to best, in the order you should go ahead and utilize these as you get better traders, is the Balder Pro, then the X400, and then finally this new tan flashlight right here. I just call it the tan flashlight instead of its official name. It's much easier to find this way. But that is the order to use for blindness. Now, the only added caveat that I want to add is the tan flashlight can blind you a little bit. It is that bright that it'll blind you. And the only bonus it really does get over, let's say, the X400 is it has a slightly wider cone to blind. So that's the trade-off there. If you find yourself being blinded by the tan flashlight, then downgrade to an X400. Because if you're blinding yourself, then it's really not serving its purpose. The flashlight is there to help you kill bad guys. Additionally, where should you put your flashlight? Well, for most of you, you're going to want your flashlight on the right hand side of the weapon. Imagine it's shoulder in your hand, the right hand side of your weapon. And that's because most of you are not swapping shoulders a lot, and you want the flashlight as far away from your face and your thorax as possible, because people are going to generally aim for the flashlight and shoot past you, right? If you're out on the left side, they're going to draw in more shots towards your thorax, towards your face. And the whole goal is to blind them and take shots off the target, right? If you're doing a lot of shoulder swapping, then you might want to go ahead and put the flashlight right on the bottom of the weapon. But it really comes down to play style. So you have to decide that for yourself. So a big way that you can really lower your weight and bump your ergonomics significantly is quit using the highest capacity magazine all the time. So with 5.56, instead of using 60s, go for the 40 round magazines. It's going to make your weapon significantly snappier, and you're still going to have a lot of lead to put down range. Additionally, you're going to be able to pack them significantly faster as well, which is just going to get you through the raid much faster, get you more loot, and keep you being very efficient in raid. So there's one way, but you really don't need to be using 60 round magazines if you're going to shooting 650 rounds per minute. All right, so think about that when modifying your own weapons. Up next is barrel length and suppressor length. So the length of the weapon all comes down to the barrel and the suppressor. Nothing else is important. So the stock and the buffer tube, for example, if you do something like a 300 blackout with a hydraulic buffer tube and then the PRS stock, that is a massive like 2 foot long stock combo. but it just goes right through your shoulder. It doesn't actually, you know, shoulder the weapon further out like it should. It just goes ahead and meshes straight through your shoulder. So it all just comes down to barrel length and suppressor length. So that's why you're not going to want to run some massive 20-inch barrel on an M4 and go inside of dorms. It's going to be indexing on everything, and indexing is the, you know, the sensation of when you go up to a wall and your weapon turns to the side. This can also happen when you're very close to players, and it gets a lot of people killed. Surprisingly, people just aren't used to it, right? So keep that in mind. And if you get the weapon barrel and suppressor length short enough, your weapon will never index. You'll just like stuff it straight into someone and you can still pull the trigger and win your fights. So keep the length of these in mind when actually building a weapon if you're going into a close quarter combat situation. It'll also make it easier to play off cover as well. So let's say you're really up close on cover and you want to lean out. If your weapon is indexed, you're going to have to go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees into position to shoot before you can actually shoot. The last thing I want to talk to you guys about is optics. So everyone, at the end of the day, optics are personal preference. However, they have kind of hidden properties you need to keep in mind. So eye relief. So how much of a black ring does the optic have around it? This can really make the optic significantly worse. So watch out for your eye relief. Another thing to watch out for is how much is this scope really taking up on your screen? How much real estate is taking up on your screen? Because this gets me killed probably once or twice a day where my optic is right over someone, whether it's the housing on a holographic. Maybe I have the flip down holographic and the flip down is actually covering someone. This does get people killed. So think about that on your optics. And the last thing you should really think about in your optics is the placement of the optics. So particularly on AKs and weapons where you can change dust covers and mounting locations of your optics, namely 1Xs like holographics, etc. Think about where you are actually putting your optic. It does make a difference. So you don't want it too far away. You don't want it too close. You want it like nice in the middle. And it'd be really cool if Battlestate Games would actually allow us to mount our optics exactly where we want them on the rail. But watch out for that. But you guys, that is going to do it for all the hidden weapon stats in Escape from Tarkov, as well as the hidden properties of attachments. Hopefully you guys learned something, and if you're curious more about something I had to say, or maybe you know some hidden properties that I didn't mention in this video, leave them in the comments down below. If you made it this far, maybe consider sharing this with your friend. I'll also be streaming live on Twitch when this comes out, so check that out in the description as well. And if you haven't seen the ultimate settings to use in Escape from Tarkov, I'll have that on screen right now. This will give you a massive advantage on seeing your enemies, and I'll also show you how to do crazy things that professional FPS players utilize, like how to transition your aim from game to game so you always have the same aim. It's insane, guys. I'll catch you later.